The Indiana Fever could be on the verge of a massive shift in ownership, and most fans don't even realize it yet. There's a name quietly sitting in the background, a man worth nearly $9 billion, who may soon hold the keys to this franchise's future. He has already invested more than $500 million into the organization, and thanks to a legal agreement already in place, whenever Herb Simon decides to step aside, control of the team could pass directly to him. His name is Steven Rales, but to understand why that matters, you have to understand what Herb Simon built, and just how close Indiana basketball once came to disappearing altogether. Rewind to 1983. Herb Simon wasn't born into wealth. He didn't inherit a fortune or step into an empire. Born in Brooklyn in 1934, he and his brother Mel built their success from the ground up. They started Simon Property Group the old-fashioned way, purchasing land, developing shopping centers, expanding steadily across the country, property by property, deal by deal. By the early 1980s, they were successful businessmen, but not yet the Billionaires history would later recognize. And that's when crisis hit. The Indiana Pacers were drowning financially. The franchise was losing money fast. Ownership was desperate. Selling was on the table. Relocation talks weren't public headlines yet. But behind closed doors, they were very real. Indianapolis was dangerously close to losing its NBA team. Fans who lived through that era remember just how serious it was. That's when Herb Simon stepped in. He and Mel purchased the Pacers for just $11 million, a move many viewed as incredibly risky at the time. The team wasn't thriving. The market was considered small, and the NBA was nowhere near the global powerhouse it is today. But for Herb Simon, this wasn't about flipping an asset or chasing profit. It was about protecting basketball in Indiana. He relocated to Indianapolis. He committed himself to the city, and for the next 4 decades, through losing seasons, front office changes, economic downturns, and every challenge in between, he never backed away from that responsibility. Then came 1999. The WNBA was expanding, and new franchises were being awarded to cities that could prove genuine demand. The league set a high bar, 5,500 season ticket commitments before approval would even be considered. Indianapolis wanted a team. But convincing thousands of people to commit to a brand new women's professional basketball league in a market that had never experienced it before was a massive challenge. And once again, Herb Simon didn't pass the responsibility off to someone else. He handled it himself. When the campaign ended, he had personally secured 4,500 of the required 5,500 season ticket commitments. Let that sink in. One man delivered over 80% of what the league demanded, because he believed in the vision. That effort gave birth to the Indiana Fever, operating under Pacers Sports and Entertainment, the organization that manages both the Indiana Pacers and the Fever under the same umbrella. This franchise wasn't built by accident. It wasn't inherited. It was fought for, protected, personally invested in. And now, decades later, with a billionaire waiting in the wings, the next chapter may be closer than anyone realizes, but the beginning wasn't glamorous. The Indiana Fever stumbled out of the gate, finishing their inaugural season with a 9-23 record, near the bottom of the standings. The crowds were sparse, the buzz was minimal. For much of the city, the team barely registered, and behind the scenes, the situation was even more serious. By 2009, after years of inconsistent results and empty seats, ownership had to confront reality. The franchise was bleeding money, hard decisions were looming. The message delivered internally was direct and unmistakable: win games and draw fans, or the long-term future of this team in Indianapolis could be in jeopardy. That's how fragile things had become. The Fever were closer to fading away than most people realized. Then everything changed because of one player, Tamika Catchings. Drafted 3rd overall in 2001, Catchings didn't even see the floor her rookie year after tearing her ACL. Many players never fully recover from that kind of setback. She did more than recover. She became the identity of the franchise. Year after year, Catchings set the standard. Relentless defense, unmatched intensity, unquestioned leadership. Elsewhere, she chose to stay loyal to elsewhere. She chose to stay loyal to Indiana for her entire career. In 2012, she delivered the ultimate reward, leading the Fever to their first and only WNBA championship. And there was Herb Simon, the owner who had weathered every storm, watching it all unfold from the sidelines as his team celebrated on the court. For longtime fans, that title wasn't just a trophy, it was validation, proof that sticking through the lean years had meant something. But dynasties don't last forever. After Catchings retired in 2016, the foundation cracked. The following season, Indiana limped to a 9-25 record. Then came more losing and more rebuilding. By 2022, the Fever hit rock bottom at 5-31. One of the league's worst marks that year. The energy that once filled the arena during Catching's prime slowly disappeared. Attendance dropped into the low thousands some nights. The franchise that once fought for relevance was drifting back into obscurity. Meanwhile, Herb Simon was now in his late 80s. His son, Steven Simon, serving as minority owner and alternate governor of Pacers Sports and Entertainment, had begun taking on a larger role in day-to-day operations. The organization was at its lowest point in years. And then came April 15th, 2024, draft night in Brooklyn, with the first overall pick in the WNBA draft. The Indiana Fever selected Caitlin Clark. What happened next changed everything. No one, not even the most optimistic executive inside the Fever's front office, could have imagined what was about to happen. Before Caitlin Clark ever stepped onto a WNBA court, she was already transforming the business of the league. Arenas were selling out weeks in advance. Opposing teams began relocating their home games to larger venues just to handle the surge in demand whenever Indiana came to town. The Fever shattered attendance numbers, setting new benchmarks for the league. Television ratings for women's basketball climbed to levels not seen in 2 decades. It wasn't hype, it was a seismic shift. When Kelly Krauskopf returned in late 2024 as president of basketball operations, she walked into a franchise that barely resembled the one she had once left behind. The facilities were upgraded, corporate interest had exploded, revenue streams were flowing at a level the organization had never experienced. In what felt like a blink, a team that once struggled to draw a few thousand fans per night had become a national headline, and then an international one. And Herb Simon, now 90 years old, was still there to witness it. He had endured 5-31 seasons. He had sat through empty arenas and uncertain years, and somehow he lived long enough to see the Indiana Fever become one of the most discussed stories in American sports. But here's the question very few people are saying out loud. Herb Simon is 90. He recently stepped away from Simon Property Group, the empire he spent 65 years building. Day-to-day responsibilities for Pacers Sports and Entertainment are largely handled by his son, Steven Simon. Herb has taken a step back, so the issue isn't whether there's a succession plan. The real question is, who benefits from it? That's where Steven Rales enters the picture. Rales is 72 years old, an Indiana native. He graduated from DePaul University before going on to co-found one of the most powerful companies in the world, Danaher Corporation. What began in the 1980s as a modest investment firm evolved, under Rales and his brother Mitchell, into a global science and technology powerhouse valued at more than $200 billion. And the way they built it matters. Their strategy was disciplined and patient. Identify undervalued assets. Acquire them. Improve operations. Expand strategically. Think long-term, decades ahead, instead of chasing short-term returns. That's the blueprint. And quietly, without fanfare, Rales began applying that same philosophy to Indiana basketball. He first acquired a 5% stake in Pacers Sports and Entertainment before most people even noticed. Then in late 2023, he expanded his position, purchasing an additional 15% stake. In total, he invested more than $500 million, valuing the organization at approximately $3.47 billion. Publicly, Herb Simon welcomed him with open arms. He called Rales a close friend, highlighted his strong Hoosier roots, framed the partnership as a positive step forward. But when Sportico reported the details of the deal, a critical element stood out. The agreement includes a potential pathway to control if the Simon family ever decides to sell. That changes everything, because now, with Caitlin Clark driving unprecedented growth, with the franchise's valuation climbing, and with ownership succession quietly looming in the background, one thing is clear. There is a billionaire already inside the building, and he may be waiting for his moment. That's not the behavior of someone making a casual investment. That's strategic positioning. That's what it looks like when a billionaire secures leverage, not just for today, but for whatever comes next. Because when Steven Rales increased his stake in late 2023, the Indiana Fever were still in rebuild mode. Caitlin Clark hadn't arrived yet. The excitement, the sellouts, the national spotlight, none of that had happened. At the time, the Fever were valued at roughly $90 million, already a solid figure by WNBA standards. Fast forward about 18 months. According to Sportico's latest estimates, the franchise is now worth over $300 million. Read that again. The valuation has more than tripled in less than 2 years, and the driving forces are clear: Caitlin Clark's arrival, record-breaking attendance, surging merchandise sales, and a landmark $2.2 billion WNBA media rights deal that permanently altered the league's financial landscape. Meanwhile, expansion teams in Portland and Toronto paid $250 million each just for the right to join the league. Fever games are selling out months ahead of schedule. The asset Rails has a pathway to control has skyrocketed in value, and it may still be climbing. So what would it actually mean if Steven Rails eventually took control? We can't predict the future, but we can study patterns. Last June, during the NBA Finals, Rails flew the entire Pacers sports and entertainment staff, not just star players or top executives, but employees across the organization, on a charter to Oklahoma City. That's not symbolic, that's significant. Moves like that cost serious money, and they build loyalty that lasts. Coaches have publicly thanked him. He's visible, he's engaged. But more important than gestures is his business philosophy. At Danaher, Rails helped pioneer a relentless growth model, identify undervalued properties, invest heavily in infrastructure, improve operations, and scale aggressively over time. The Fever fit that model almost perfectly right now. The brand is strong, the growth curve is steep, the demand is exploding, but the infrastructure is still catching up. Their dedicated practice facility, was part of a broader league-wide push to modernize WNBA operations, won't even open until 2027. In other words, the foundation is still being built while the spotlight is already blazing. For an operator like Rails, that's not a weakness, that's opportunity, and if he ever takes the wheel, the next phase of this franchise could look very different from anything we've seen before. There's a very real possibility that the Indiana Fever's future looks nothing like its past. Imagine a scenario where Steven Rails decides this isn't just a team to maintain, it's a brand to transform. Not simply competitive, not just relevant, but iconic. The kind of franchise the Golden State Warriors evolved into during the 2000s. A championship contender and a global business powerhouse at the same time. A destination. Yeah, it's the type of organization that doesn't chase attention, it attracts it. Elite players want to be there. Sponsors line up. The spotlight becomes permanent. Herb Simon built this franchise on loyalty, on commitment to Indiana, on refusing to let basketball leave the city he cared about. And that loyalty is real. It shaped everything. Reports have long suggested that his estate plans include provisions designed to keep the team in Indianapolis. Moving the franchise for profit was never his mindset. But loyalty and expansion are two different philosophies, and right now the Fever are standing at a crossroads. This is the most valuable the franchise has ever been. Valuations have surged past $300 million and continue to climb. Caitlin Clark is expected to return healthy in 2026. A new CBA is being negotiated, one that could dramatically reshape player salaries and league economics. Expansion franchises in Portland and Toronto just paid $250 million each for entry. The WNBA feels like it's hovering at the edge of something historic, similar to where the NBA stood in the early 1990s before it exploded into a worldwide phenomenon, and sitting in position with a clear pathway to control what may be the league's centerpiece franchise as a 72-year-old billionaire who has already invested over $500 million to secure his opportunity. That matters, because Herb Simon's legacy is undeniable. He personally sold 4,500 season tickets to bring women's professional basketball to Indiana. He invested when others hesitated. He sustained the franchise through the Tamika Catchings era, through 5 to 31 seasons, through years when national attention was non-existent. He protected this team when it was fragile. Every ounce of what the Fever are today traces back to that commitment, but time is undefeated. At 90 years old, with the organization's value surging and a succession structure already in place, the reality is unavoidable. Change is coming, and with Caitlin Clark transforming the Fever into one of the most talked about teams in sports, the next era may already be quietly forming behind the scenes. The groundwork has been laid, the investment has been made, the pathway exists, and Steven Rails may simply be waiting for the moment when the page turns and a new chapter begins.